What's going on, everybody? Coming at you from Wisconsin today, in the middle of, well, it's just a beautiful morning. It's just a beautiful morning here in Wisconsin. There's no cheese. I don't have any cheese around. We got a woodpecker. He's over there. Everything's pretty cool. So I'll tell you what, let's do one of my favorite kind of videos, and it's this versus thing. These are really fun. I know you like them. The numbers down there say that you like them, and I like doing them. They're really fun. And I think this might be like the granddaddy of all of them. What is the differences between a Gibson Les Paul and an Epiphone Les Paul? I've literally been trying to catch a picture of that woodpecker the whole time we've been here, and I haven't been able to capture him. I got a 600mm zoom now, and I can't. I haven't seen the bird since I got the lens. This is probably one of the biggest, craziest conversations ever, right? Obviously, if you've been a guitar player or been around guitars and you've been on the internet since the internet was invented, you know that mostly Epiphone players are going to get in forums and Facebook groups and everywhere and try to convince the rest of the world that their Epiphone is as good as a Gibson Les Paul. And a lot of people think they're the same, and why would you spend $24.99 instead of $7.99 for an American one when the Epiphone one is just as good and they are pretty much the same? Well, we're going to talk about the fact that they are not. They are not the same at all. They are completely different guitars. We'll get into the details, but first, two things. One, make sure you hit the like button, because when you hit the like button, that helps my channel, obviously, but it also helps you. So when you go and look at something on YouTube, if you've liked videos that you like, those subjects will come up more and you'll see less stuff you don't want to see, so hit the button. And number two, there will be no sound sample in this video. As you are aware, I don't do a sound sample in a video where the point is to talk about the technical differences between two things. It's not a sound sample video. This is you know what a Les Paul sounds like. If you don't, you might have accidentally clicked on the wrong channel. You probably know what a Les Paul sounds like. You'll also be able to find a lot of Epiphones everywhere, because most of you are here because you own one and you think it's as good as a Les Paul anyway, so you probably already own one. If you don't, go on Instagram and find somebody who's playing one. There will be millions of them, so you know what they sound like. We don't need to do that. What we need to do is understand why they're different and why they cost different. The biggest thing is obviously country of origin, so we won't get into the politics or the particulars of this, but we're just going to say that labor costs and parts sourcing for Epiphone, who is a separate company from Gibson, who builds all of these Gibson looking guitars under license by Gibson, but they are separate companies, source their parts, get everything there, completely separate. They get everything from a different place than Gibson. They're two completely different entities. They operate under the same umbrella, but they are two completely different entities. Epiphones are made in China, and the associated labor costs, the associated parts costs, they are a Chinese guitar. Just as much as any other guitar is a Chinese guitar that's made in China, and all the things that come with that. Gibson is a made in the United States product. The parts are designed, the parts are made, everything. In order for a guitar to be said it's made in the United States, it has to be 95% sourced and labored in the United States, which means all of those parts come from the United States. The pickups are designed in the United States. They're made in the United States. Some of the wood is sourced from other parts of the world, obviously, like rosewood, for example. We'll get into it in a minute. Most of everything in the guitar is from the United States. Completely different. So those two things, country of origin and parts sourcing, are going to be a major driver to the actual cost of the guitar, why an Epiphone is $7.99 and a Les Paul is $24.99. Let's get into the particulars of the guitar, the actual construction of the guitar, and why they are not the same, even though you want to say they are. First of all, let's talk about the bodies. So it's pretty fairly commonly known that a Gibson Les Paul is made from a mahogany body with a maple cap on top of it. So you would think that an Epiphone would be the same. It is, but it isn't. And then, of course, the neck is mahogany with a rosewood fretboard. So the difference between the two guitars is there's a couple. One is the mahogany on an American-made Les Paul is mahogany. And they go to great lengths to source the wood for that. It is mahogany. A Chinese Les Paul, the Epiphone Les Paul, it could be any number of mahogany species. So I didn't know this till a few years ago, but there are 250-ish types of wood that fall under the umbrella of what you could get away with calling mahogany. Sapele, for example, is one of those woods. It's used on a lot of like lower priced Taylors, lower priced Martins, and Epiphone Les Pauls. So it could be Sapele, it could be something else, but it's not actual mahogany. Okay, so it's a cheaper wood. The bodies are not always one piece. Sometimes they're a bunch of pieces put together. And one of the biggest differences is the top on the guitar is just a piece of maple. On a Gibson Les Paul, the Gibson Les Pauls are a solid piece of figured maple. So you see like a pretty top on a Les Paul, that's the wood all the way down to the mahogany. It could be 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick before they mill it. And it is a solid piece of wood glued on top of a mahogany body. On an Epiphone Les Paul, it could be just any old piece of maple. Doesn't even have to be pretty. They glue that on top of any old piece of sort of mahogany, or pieces of sort of mahogany, and there is your guitar. And then it's not that pretty, so they carve the top of the not that pretty maple, and then they put a veneer on top of it. So if you look at like a Slash Les Paul with those pretty colors, that's actually a very thin, like paper thin veneer that goes on top of a cheap maple on top of a cheap mahogany. And then once they put the guitar all together and they put the fretboard on top of it, it's probably Indian laurel these days, I think. I'm pretty sure. I just double checked to make sure my facts were right. So Epiphone is an Indian laurel fretboard. It is not rosewood. So it's kind of a cheaper knockoff, almost sort of looks like rosewood, but it's not rosewood. Is it worse? Yeah, I mean, that's personal taste, right? Like, I don't use rosewood anymore. It's okay. Like, you can use whatever you want. But point is, if you want a traditional built proper Les Paul, you have to get a real one, because they don't even make the Epiphone stuff even out of the same materials. It's completely different materials. Let's talk hardware. Gibson hardware, they use Tone Pros, two pneumatic bridges, and tailpieces. I'll give you an example. A Chinese version of that you would see on an Epiphone could be about $20 if you were to buy it on eBay or Amazon or anywhere. The Tone Pros version of that's going to be around $80. So the price difference between these two is pretty high, even if they're both nickel, and it's because of the quality of the metal itself. The quality of the metal itself on the Chinese stuff is way, way lower. The saddles and everything on a Tone Pros bridge are way harder, way less prone to like grooving out over time from string wear and that kind of stuff. The Chinese ones are going to do it a lot faster. I've seen Chinese ones bend. I've seen lots of crazy problems with Chinese stuff. Are you going to have those problems? Probably not, but I'm just saying there's a difference between those hardwares. They're not the same. And it's 3 to 4 times the cost for the American stuff versus the Chinese stuff. And there is a quality difference. The tuner's the same thing. The tuners are much higher quality than the Chinese ones. Same thing, 3 to 4 times the cost. And you're going to say, yeah, well, when you buy it at scale, it wouldn't be that much different. Actually, when you buy Chinese stuff at scale, it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. American stuff doesn't always get... American hardware, this has been my experience, that American hardware, let's say you buy 10 of them, and you might get them a little cheaper. You buy 100 of them, and you get a little cheaper. But it gets to a point where you can't do that anymore, because the American company who makes the American hardware just can't make it for free, so they have to stop it at some point. It only gets so cheap by volume. Chinese stuff is a little different. I swear, the more you buy, the cheaper it gets, and you could get down to a few cents a piece for a tuning key, for example, and you would pay literally 4 times as much for the American one because they are physically different. They are not the same. The ratios are not always the same. The other thing too is Gibson is going to do a better job about consistently sourcing parts so that they're the same across the range. A lot of Chinese guitars, even Epiphone stuff, may change suppliers based on availability and volume. So you could get a year of Epiphone guitars or 6 months of Epiphone guitars that have the tuners that come from a certain place, but then they'll come from a different place 6 months later. You may not know that until one of them fails and you go to try to change one and you can't get the same one, or you have to look around to get the same one. So hardware is completely different. The pick guards are different. All the plastics are a higher quality on the American stuff than they are on the Chinese stuff. If you even look at the physical difference between a pick guard on an American Les Paul versus Epiphone Les Paul, they're actually cut different. They have different angles on them. They don't even look the same. The binding on the guitars is different. The American guitars have a thicker binding. It's a different material than the cheaper ones on the Epiphone side. When we start talking about finishes, a lot of people like to gloss over, like what I did there, the difference between nitrocellulose and polyurethane. A lot of people will say, well, that's not a big enough difference to jump the price in a guitar. It actually is. I think somebody's having a fight over there. The cost of materials of nitrocellulose versus urethane is astronomically different. The amount of labor to prepare the guitar. So you actually have to prepare the wood differently for nitrocellulose than you do for wood or for urethane. The drying time and the labor to actually apply and let it sit around and all of the things they have to do for nitrocellulose is much longer and much more involved than urethane. It is not just as simple as I grab this can or I grab this can off the shelf. The process for preparing the guitar, finishing the guitar completely changes based on what you're using, and nitrocellulose is far more expensive as the whole process than urethane. Honestly, the smell of a new Gibson guitar in the case is worth the price of admission, in my opinion. Okay, so let's talk about the nut on a Gibson Les Paul. Is a Graphtec nut now. They used to, the vintage ones were nylon, and then they've gone various ways, and I know a lot of people get bent because it's not bone, but you're going to see more and more guitar companies getting away from using bone because of the consistency issues with it, because of the cost of it, because it's actually not that good. We've done a bunch of videos on this. Graphtec is so much more, it's harder, it's more consistent. Like every one, you can make it exactly the same and it can be much more consistent. It's easier to machine. There's many reasons to use Graphtec over bone. And I know a lot of people will argue that point, but I don't care, it's better. Epiphones use New Bone by Graphtec, which is their plastic. It's a cheaper version of Graphtec. It's not as hard, it's Graphtec's plastic. All right, let's talk electronics, because we know that there's a big difference here. Pickups are made in the United States on a Gibson. They're made in China or Korea on an Epiphone. The hardware is completely different. The base plates are completely different. Gibson guitars are designed and made in the United States. They have a whole bunch of people in Nashville that this is their job. They make those pickups, they design those pickups, they spend time on those pickups, they make them right. Then what they do is they design and they spec out, and then they send to a Chinese company or a Korean company, depending on where they're being made, and they send some specs over there and they apply them to cheaper materials, and that's why you get a cheaper version of a Gibson pickup made for the Epiphone guitars. They are not the same. Obviously, as you may or may not be aware, pickups are my area, and I will tell you they are not the same. The materials are not the same, the magnets are not the same, the wire is not the same. Nothing is the same, and they do not sound the same. It's why we do not need to do a sound comparison, because they are just not even in the same ballpark. Do they sound good? Are they good enough for a $799 guitar? Absolutely. Do they sound good enough to introduce you to Les Paul world and get you on the whole course of playing Gibsons later on? Absolutely. That's what they're for. That's what that Epiphone guitar is for. It's to get you into the Gibson ecosystem, but it's not exactly the same as its bigger brother, the American Les Paul, and it makes sense. The cool part about it is they are starting in the Epiphones to use CTS pots and orange drop caps and vintage style wiring. They're doing all that stuff in the cheaper guitar. So while they are not the same, they are making efforts to make that Chinese guitar better. Even on the Epiphone Les Paul now, they're using Switchcraft switches, which they never did before. They're using Switchcraft jacks, which is great. So the quality of the Epiphone stuff is coming up, but it is nowhere near the same as a regular Gibson Les Paul. Now the question would be, does the building down to a price, namely $799 American at the time of making this video, is that justify the price difference between an $800 guitar and a $2,500 guitar? Yeah, it does. There's a lot of factors that goes into that. Are you getting as good of a guitar? No, you're not. I mean, the Chinese Epiphone is not the same. It is not as good. There are cost-cutting measures, pretty major ones, applied to the Epiphone guitar versus the Gibson one. Does that mean you should not own an Epiphone? I think everybody should own it. They're great. They're fantastic guitars. And the cool part about it is, for $799, you get this guitar, and if you don't like something about it, you can just upgrade it because it's a standard, the sizes are all standard and stuff, which is cool. So if you want to put new pickups in it, we've got our DAFs, we've got our center punches, we've got a bunch of stuff that we've made just for that guitar. Super cool. I think that everybody should at least own one for a little while so that they know. And value for money, they're fantastic. Do not discount them. And do not be one of those people who's like, it's not real, blah, blah. But also don't be one of those people who's like, my guitar is just as good as the Gibson. Because it's not. It's not. It just isn't. But it's cool. And you should own one. Also, you can't put humbuckers in a Telecaster and make it sound like a Les Paul. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Let me know if you want me to do a video about that. Because that would be fun too. Because there's a lot of differences and reasons why, even if you put humbuckers in a Telecaster, it will never sound like a Les Paul. There's a lot of reasons for that. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make that video, because that's pretty cool. Make sure you check out our live video on Thursday. We have content almost every day of the week now, so make sure you check it out. We've got news on Tuesday. We're doing some short clips from our live streams on Wednesday, which is cool. We're doing our live stream on Thursday. We're doing No Guitars Allowed on Friday. And we're doing these videos on Monday. So thanks for hanging out. And make sure you check out Dylan Talks Tone. Because when you buy stuff at Dylan Talks Tone, that's what keeps us all going. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Tell your friends. And chat about it in the comments. What you think of all of this. But be nice, obviously. You know what I mean? Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you soon.